Is video working? Oh, yay, video is working. Yay, okay. Detectives and Togas. Yes, I'm at home tonight. We're reading chapters 8, maybe 9. We'll see how it goes. So, the boys looked around nervously, but fortunately nothing was paying attention to them. Nobody. If they recognize us as Xanthos pupils, they'll tear us to pieces, Antonius said tensely. Flavius turned white and tried to make himself as small as possible. Follow me quietly, Mucius whispered. With deliberate slowness, he sauntered toward the marble staircase. Whistling idly, he climbed the steps between the columns. The others followed the example, but as soon as they reached the top, they dashed off in a wild flight down the length of the corridor, leaped down the steps 3 at a time, and gave the forum a wide berth. Not until they reached the foot of the Esquiline hill did they begin to feel fairly safe and slow their pace. Did you notice the slaves copying the news? Publius said. Before long, all Rome will know that Caius is a dumbbell. Perhaps Vinicius's copyist was there too. Flavius worried. No doubt about it, Mucius exclaimed. We must get to Vinicius before he does, and he started running again. In front of Vinicius's villa, Publius was waiting for them. You're a regular marathon runner, Mucius said in praise. Oh, I practically walked, Publius said, still panting. What did Rufus say when you told him his writing tablet had been stolen from school? Julius asked. Nothing, Publius replied. He was sound asleep. I didn't bother to wake him, just took the tablet and scooted. Mucius pulled a bronze ring, and a big uniformed doorkeeper, who looked like a former gladiator, opened the front door. What do you want? He asked gruffly. We must speak to Vinicius. We must speak to the senator, Mucius said. The doorkeeper raised his eyebrows in astonishment. And who do you think you are? He demanded. Pupils of the Xanthos school, Mucius answered. The doorkeeper was not impressed. Oh ho, isn't that wonderful, he said. The master will be flattered, I'm sure. Is he expecting you? That isn't necessary, Mucius said. He knows us. We've come about Rufus. Rufus? Rufus who? Rufus is our friend, the son of Marcus Praetorius. Mucius replied with dignity. The doorkeeper frowned in thought. Marcus Praetorius. Oh, yes. Isn't he the general who lost the battle against the Gauls? That isn't Rufus's fault, Mucius said indignantly. Go away, you kids. The doorkeeper snorted. He was about to slam the door in their faces when Claudia, accompanied by one of her governesses, appeared at the back of the vestibule. Mucius instantly shouted, Claudia! Claudia! He won't let us in! Claudia came running up and ordered the doorkeeper to admit the boys. They're my friends, she said firmly. The man's manner instantly changed. He flung open the door with a flourish, calling out, Right foot forward, please, to ward off the misfortune it would bring upon the household if anyone entered with his left foot forward. Superstitious they are. Picture. It's got elfin ears in that picture. How nice of you to come, Claudia said joyfully. I was awfully bored. She was dressed now in a flamingo pink tunic with a flower-embroidered hem. On her feet were dainty little silken house sandals. I'm sorry we have no time to play, Mucius said gravely. We must speak to your father at once. We found out for sure that Rufus didn't do it. Oh, that's wonderful, Claudia said, clapping her hands with pleasure. Take off your sandals and come along. How many of you at home, your mom says, take off your shoes as soon as you walk in the door? The boys quickly slipped out of their sandals, shot a triumphant glance back at the doorkeeper, and ran along behind Claudia, and she led them into a large courtyard surrounded with columns and instructed them to wait. I'll tell my father you want to see him, she said, and she slipped through a curtained opening at the farther end of the court. The boys straightened out the folds of their togas and gave each other a critical inspection to make sure that they looked respectable enough for the senator. Flavius went to the fountain in the center of the court and moistened his hands, and he slicked down his hair. The others followed his example. Hello, a voice suddenly spoke behind them, and they whirled around and saw Caius standing between two pillars, a rather sheepish smile on his face. What are you fellows doing here? He asked with forced cheerfulness. Their only response was a hostile stare. Caius gave them a sickly grin. Forgotten how to talk? He asked, but the boys remained stubbornly silent. At that, his face flushed and he hissed furiously. Idiots! Then he shrugged, turned on his heel, and went out. Now he knows we're mad at him, Flavius remarked. We'll settle with him yet, Mucius growled. Just wait till we get him to our cave, Antonius said. He dipped his right foot into the basin of the fountain, but immediately jerked it out again. Whew, that is cold. The curtain parted, Claudia appeared and called excitedly, Come along, my father's waiting for you. The boys followed her, and she led them into a lofty, magnificently furnished room. The floor was covered by deep carpets, and wide couches with plump cushions stood about everywhere. There were paintings on the walls, and from the ceiling hung costly lamps of Alexandrian glass. Claudia pointed to a tall double door between two marble statues. My father is in there, in the gymnasium, she said. Is he in a good mood? Antonius asked. Not very, Claudia said, wrinkling her nose. I only talked to him through the door, but he sounded like a bear. Are you scared? Not a bit, Mucius snapped, but he cast a rather worried glance at the floor. Go right in, Claudia said. He won't bite. He knows you, after all. She sat down on a couch, leaned back gracefully against the cushions, and smiled encouragement at the boys. Mucius gave a quick tug at his toga once more and opened the door. The senator was lying on a wide marble table, having his back massaged by two slaves. The room smelled strongly of perfumed oils. He turned his head toward the boys and asked harshly, Well, what do you want? His hair was snow white, his eyebrows very bushy and still a dense black, which looked odd to the boys. His words came out in staccato rhythm because the slaves were at the moment pounding his back with their palms. We've come about Rufus, Mucius said. The senator glared at them. If you've come to tell me a pack of lies, you can get out right now, he said threateningly. A rotten beginning, Mucius thought, but he tried to go on. You see, we are Rufus's friends. We go to school with him. I know that, the senator interrupted. Why hasn't Rufus come with you? He's sick, caught a cold, Mucius replied. Nonsense, Vinicius growled. He's hiding because he has a guilty conscience. He honestly did not do it, Mucius hastily went on. We would put our hands in the fire for him. The senator sat up, pushing the slaves aside. Vouch for him all you like, he said. You won't get anywhere with me that way. He took his tunic from the slaves, put it on, and in spite of his considerable girth, swung nimbly off the table. Stooping, he picked up a bundle of wax tablets and held them under Mucius's nose. Here, take a look at the newspaper. My copyist has just brought me the latest edition. All Rome knows about the desecration of the temple. People expect me to find the culprit and turn him over to the police. I intend to go directly to the prefect of the city now and lodge a charge against Rufus. His vile act is an insult to our dearly beloved emperor, and he must pay for it. I am sorry, but consideration for my friend Pretonius cannot be allowed to sway my decision." Mucius was alarmed to hear that the newspaper report had already reached the senator, so they had come too late. "But Rufus has sworn he did not do it," he stammered in confusion. "That was as far as he could get. Then he lied," the senator rapped out. Wait a second, did I skip a page? No. "That was as far as he could get. Then he lied," the senator rapped out. "My son says it is Rufus. It's a Rufus's handwriting. My son would not tell an untruth." "Rufus's handwriting was forged," Mucius cried out. The senator was taken aback. "What's that you say?" he asked. "His handwriting was forged," Mucius repeated. "We have definite proof of it," and he told Vinicius about the theft of the writing tablet from Xantippus. "Someone stole it in order to have Rufus's handwriting to imitate." He finished his tale. At this point, Julius spoke up. With a self-important expression, he said, "Here is Rufus's real handwriting," and he handed Vinicius the tablet Publius had just brought. Vinicius glared at it. "Why, here it is again. Caius is a dumbbell," he exclaimed angrily. The boys were frightened. They had not expected this reaction. That's our fault," Mucius stammered. "I mean, we had Rufus write the same thing again because we wanted to compare his writing with the scrawl on the temple." Vinicius growled, but he sounded somewhat appeased. "And who would you say forged Rufus's handwriting?" "That we don't know," Mucius admitted. "It certainly wasn't any of us," Flavius protested, flushing. Vinicius turned to Mucius again. "You say Rufus wrote this?" he asked, pointing to the tablet. "Yes," Mucius said. "We thought that with your experience as a judge, you would see at once that the writing on the temple wall was a fake." "I don't know much about handwritings," the senator said, but the theory evidently intrigued him. Stepping to the window, he stood there for a while, looking alternately at the writing tablet and the inscription on the wall of the temple, and finally he said, "These two handwritings certainly look very, very similar." "They would have to be similar if someone were deliberately making a copy," Publius said, grinning. Vinicius returned to them. He planted himself in front of the boys and looked at them searchingly. "All right," he finally said, "I will look into this theory of yours." He turned to a well-dressed slave who had been lingering respectfully in the background throughout the conversation. "Sulpicius, run and see whether Scribonus is at home. Ask him to come to me at once. If he is already at the Apollo Library, take an express sedan chair and bring him here." The slave hurried out. Vinicius sat down and asked the boys to be seated also. "Scribonus is director of the Apollo Library," he said. "He is the outstanding handwriting expert in Rome. If Scribonus attests that the writing is forged, it is forged. And if he says it is genuine, it is." "It is forged," Mucius said with conviction. "That is for Scribonus to say," the senator held. "What will you do if it is forged?" Flavius asked. "That I do not know," Vinicius replied, laughing. "But at any rate, he will know that Rufus is not guilty. He would not be likely to forge his own handwriting, would he?" "Of course not," the boys burst out. They were feeling a great deal better. Vinicius wasn't so unreasonable after all. In fact, he became quite friendly. He asked them about their parents, about school, and about what they were planning to be. "I want to be an orator," Julius said. "My father takes me to the Senate with him so that I'll learn." "And I'm going to be a charioteer," Antonius said at the top of his voice. "What a thrill, flying around the arena with 4 Fry Arabian stallions harnessed to the chariot. The people will throw flowers down upon me, and the emperor will crown me with laurels." Their pleasant chat was interrupted by voices behind the door, and in a moment, Sulpicius entered, followed by a tiny old man with a long gray beard, Scribonus. The boys realized at once that he must be a Greek. Almost all the scholars in Rome were Greeks. Moreover, Romans did not wear beards. Scribonus wore no toga, only a shabby tunic which badly needed laundering. But although the man looked like a beggar, the senator greeted him with great respect. "How kind of you to come," he said, and started to explain what he wanted. Scribonus listened attentively, head tilted to one side. "Louder?" he said impatiently every so often. Finally he took the writing tablet, held it close to his eyes, and asked irritably, "Caius is a dumbbell. Who is this Caius?" Vinicius' good humor evaporated, and he frowned with annoyance. "Caius is my son," he snapped. "So I thought," Scribonus said, unperturbed. He thrust a finger into his ear and wiggled it back and forth, and then he handed down his verdict. "This was written by a boy about 12 years old. The writing is crude, but already has personal character. And where is the supposed forgery?" "Over there on the temple wall," Vinicius said, pointing out of the window. Scribonus walked to the window, but took hardly a glance at the temple. "That's much too far for me," he decided. "I'm nearsighted. We will have to go over there." Vinicius and Scribonus went out, followed by the boys. As they passed through the main hall, Claudia sprang from the couch and joined the party. "What did my father say?" she asked Mucius in a low voice. "He's been most cooperative," Mucius replied, rather condescendingly. They went out through the front door and crossed the short distance to the temple of Minerva. Scribonus again examined the writing tablet. Then he went up close to the wall, so that the tip of his nose was almost touching the stone, and stood in silence for a long time, studying the painted red letters. At last he said, "The paint has run into the center of the U, and the upper part of the A is also smeared. But these details do not deceive me." The boys were holding their breath, but Scribonius took his time. From his tunic he took out a large, multicolored handkerchief, rubbed his nose deliberately, replaced the handkerchief, and stood looking again from wall to writing tablet, and finally he spoke. "The writing on the wall is by the same hand as the writing on the tablet." Oh no. Chapter 9. What in the world? How? If Rufus says he didn't write on the wall, how could it be his writing? Somebody is lying? Or somebody's magic? Or there's something we don't know. Chapter 9. Wet clothes and empty money box. Not sure what that has to do with writing on the wall. Vinicius, who had been so reasonable, was angry once more. "Bring that Rufus to me at once," he growled. "I'll talk to him." He thanked Scribonus for his professional services, took Claudia by the hand, and returned to the house. Scribonus handed the writing tablet to Julius and strolled off. The boys angrily watched him go. "He would mess things up for us," Publius said. "So Rufus lied after all," Mucius murmured. "Yet I would have sworn he was telling the truth." "What's the use now?" Julius said. "The die is cast, and Scribonus has ruined our case. It looks bad for Rufus." "He can still run away," Flavius said. "It's too late for that now," Mucius said, "and he doesn't want to anyway. We'd better go and get him." This time they were not in such a great hurry. Their footsteps lagged, and it took them nearly 15 minutes to reach Pretonius's house. The old white-bearded slave looked pale and troubled as he opened the door for them. "Ah, the gods be thanked you have come," he exclaimed. "My mistress has asked about you several times. Go in quickly. Something terrible has happened." Each of the boys felt a sinking sensation in the pit of his stomach. They were so flustered that they forgot to remove their sandals. They made for the main hall and hesitated uneasily at the entrance. Rays of sunlight fell through the roof opening upon the household altar in the corner, which was adorned with early spring flowers. A cat lay asleep on a couch. The first impression was one of peace and harmony. But then they saw Rufus's mother, Livia, sitting motionless in an armchair close by the wall from which her husband's weapon collection hung. And she was in tears. and her favorite slave girls stood around her in dismay. When Livia caught sight of the boy, she sprang to her feet and came toward them. "Rufus has been arrested," she said, struggling to steady her voice. The boys were speechless with horror. You must help me," Livia pleaded. "You are all his friends, aren't you? You know he has done nothing bad." "They say he is guilty of desecrating a temple. I cannot believe that. My son is no hoodlum. About half an hour ago, an army officer and 2 soldiers came to take him to prison. Rufus was in his room, but he must have heard us talking about him because he came out wrapped only in his blanket and asked, 'What's the matter, Mother?' The officer put a hand on his shoulder and said, 'You have insulted our emperor. You are under arrest.' Rufus wrenched away and came running to me, crying, 'I swear I didn't do it, Mommy. I didn't do it.' He was as white as this tunic of mine. He wanted to say more, but the officer shouted at him to be quiet and even threatened him with his sword. They led him away just as he was, without even giving him a chance to get dressed. I was nearly out of my mind. I would have run after him, but my girls held me back for fear I would be arrested too. My poor boy," she sobbed. It can't be true." The boys looked down at the floor in embarrassment. At last Mucius murmured, "We did not believe it either." Livia gave him a look of gratitude. "They tell me that you were here earlier, shortly before Rufus was arrested. Why was Rufus not in school? What has been going on?" Mucius told her the story, with the other boys filling in his omissions. Livia listened more and more astonished. "Rufus behaved very foolishly in school," she said sadly. "But Caius also did wrong. He knows how much Rufus thinks of his father. Ever since the news of this unfortunate battle arrived, Rufus has been a changed boy. He is upset about his father, so that his anger at Caius was only natural. But angry or not, he is still not the kind of boy to desecrate a temple. There are plenty of other walls to write on in Minerva Square. There is one point I do not understand," Livia said. "You told me that the senator wants to see Rufus. Has Senator Vinicius already called on the prefect of the city, or has he not?" "No," Mucius said proudly. "We stopped him from doing that." "And yet somebody must have accused Rufus," Livia said. "Don't you see?" Here was a startling thought. If the senator had not yet filed charges against Rufus, who was responsible for his arrest? "We are the only ones who know it is Rufus's handwriting," Julius said thoughtfully. "I mean just us and the senator and Claudia and Caius." "And Scribonus," Mucius said. But no, Rufus was already arrested by the time Scribonus heard the story. "Perhaps Caius denounced him," Publius suggested. "Impossible," the others exclaimed. "Why not?" Publius asked. "Caius was pretty mad." "That's silly," Julius pointed out. "Caius knew his father was going to file charges against Rufus. Even supposing he wanted Rufus punished, he couldn't have planned it any better. His father, the famous senator, going to the prefect personally. Besides, the prefect would never arrest someone just on Caius's say-so." This last point convinced the others. "Perhaps it was Vinicius' secretary, or old Herodotus, Caius's tutor," Flavius said. "They also knew about Rufus." Julius had an answer for that too. "They are slaves," he pointed out, "and slaves cannot bear witness against a Roman citizen. Besides, they would never have dared to act without their master's knowledge." "But it must have been someone," Mucius exclaimed, baffled. "Simple enough. Someone saw him doing it," Publius said calmly. "Saw whom doing it?" Julius asked desperately, making signs to Publius to keep quiet. But Publius did not understand. Someone saw Rufus riding Caius as a dumbbell on the temple wall. Livia looked at them in fright. "So you do believe Rufus is guilty?" she asked anxiously. Well, Publius looked down at the floor, and the other boys also avoided meeting Livia's eyes. "You cannot believe that," Livia said firmly. "My son swore that he did not do it, and he has never lied to me." But her confidence was wavering, for she turned to one of her slave girls and asked, "When did Rufus come home last night?" "I don't know," the girl said, "but Rumpus must know, mistress." "Did Rumpus bring Rufus home from school last night?" Livia asked the boys. "Rufus had already left," Mucius said. "Rumpus hurried home, hoping to meet Rufus on the way." "I have not spoken to Rumpus about this," Livia said. "Unfortunately, he is not here now. I was unwell this morning, and Rumpus was sent to the doctor to fetch healing herbs for me. The doctor lives on the other side of the Tiber River, so Rumpus will not be back for 3 hours at least. We can only wait for him. Perhaps you will be kind enough to come back later. I need your help. I myself can do little about this. Of course, I have already sent an express courier to my husband, but the man will take at least 5 days to reach Gaul, assuming that he can find enough changes of horses along the way. 10 days there and back at best. And meanwhile, what terrible things may happen to my boy. We must find the real culprit as soon as possible. And you can help me. You won't desert Rufus, will you?" The boys assented heartily, but they were secretly wondering in what way they could help Livia, for by now they were almost certain that Rufus was guilty. Livia, however, clung to a last hope. "Rufus could not have come home late last night," she said. "Otherwise Rumpus would have told me." The boys did not understand. "You told me that the desecration of the temple could have taken place only between the 5th and the 6th hours of the night, didn't you?" she asked. "Yes," Julius said. "The policemen swore that they saw nothing before the 5th hour, and by the time we discovered the writing in the morning, the paint was already dry, which means it had to have been put on the wall not much later than the 5th hour of the night." "Well, that would mean that Rufus would have had to leave the house last night," Livia continued, "and that is impossible. The door is locked and well guarded. He could not crawl through the windows because they are much too small, and the garden wall is too high to climb over." Once again the boys were taken aback. From their own experience, they knew there was no chance of getting out of their own houses unnoticed late at night. "Perhaps Rumpus secretly let him out," Julius suggested. "No," said Livia firmly. "That is out of the question. I trust Rumpus completely. He is utterly loyal to us. He could not have a better tutor for Rufus. Rumpus is much more a member of the family than a slave. My husband brought him back from Macedonia when he was still a boy, and we have raised him as if he were our own son. In fact, we intend to give him his freedom soon, and he will then be able to choose whether to stay with us or open a small shop somewhere in town." She sighed. "I suppose it is best for you all to go home now. There is nothing we can do at the moment. We must wait to hear what Rumpus has to say. We left our school things in Rufus's room. May we get them?" Julius asked. Livia nodded. The boys hurried to Rufus's room, followed by Livia, who held the curtain aside for them so that they would have more light. The boys picked up their stuff and started to leave, but Mucius suddenly remembered his lantern, which Rufus had taken by mistake the night before. He looked around for it. Rufus's room was furnished with Spartan simplicity. Along one wall stood the bed, over which hung a portrait of Rufus's father in full general's uniform. Along the other wall was a small table, a hassock, and a shelf for school books and toys. He had no wardrobe. His clothes hung from big nails. "What are you looking for?" Julius asked. "My lantern," Mucius said. "Rufus took it with him last night by mistake. It was an expensive lantern and has my name engraved on it. My family will make a fuss if they notice that I don't have it." "It ought to be around," Antonius said, peering about the room. "What is it?" Livia asked, coming in. "I'm looking for my lantern," Mucius said, flushing. I lent it to Rufus, and I'd like to have it back." "It must be among his things on the shelf," Livia said. Mucius rummaged, but found nothing on the shelf except Rufus's books and writing materials. 11 marbles, a spinning top that you spin, broken wooden soldiers, a small knife, a fragment of Alexandrian glass, and a money box for savings. Publius took the money box from his hand and shook it curiously. "It's empty," he said, replacing it on the shelf. Meanwhile, Antonius had crawled under the bed. He emerged with a bundle of clothing. "This is all I could find," he said in disappointment. But Livia was startled. "It's most unlike Rufus to hide things under his bed," she said. "He is usually so orderly." She took the clothes from Antonius and promptly exclaimed, "Why, these clothes are soaking wet!" She held them up to show the boys. The clothes looked as though they had just been taken out of a full tub of water. She had only to press them for fat drops to splatter down upon the stone floor. "Why should they be wet?" Livia said in wonderment. At this moment a slave girl came rushing into the room. "Rufus is already back, mistress," she said breathlessly. "Already?" Livia asked, "and then he could not have gone to the doctor." "No, mistress," the girl said. "He turned back to bring you important news." Which we will not find out until the next time I read. So many questions. More questions and no answers. Until next time, goodbye.